My name is Darius. Sometimes the ultimate betrayal isn't the affair itself, but watching your daughter, the child you've loved and supported unconditionally, invite your wife's lover to her wedding and expect you to pay for the privilege of being humiliated in front of everyone you know. I'd been married to Helen for 17 years when she announced she wanted a divorce to find herself. And 4 months into the proceedings, while I was still funding our daughter's wedding, I discovered that my only daughter Ashley had invited Helen's affair partner to the ceremony and expected me to continue financing an event where I'd be publicly disrespected. 21 years total together. If you count the 4 years before we legally married, years that had deteriorated from genuine partnership into something toxic and controlling that I'd stayed in far longer than I should have, and that had apparently taught our daughter that my feelings were completely expendable. We met when I was 23 and Helen was 22, both living in Charlotte and working entry-level positions. I was in sales for a commercial printing company, working long hours for modest commission-based income. Helen was an administrative assistant at a law firm, with a steady paycheck but nothing substantial. We'd met through mutual friends and had been attracted to each other from the start. We started dating casually at first, then more seriously as months passed. The relationship moved quickly, driven by chemistry and the intensity that young people mistake for compatibility. We got pregnant by accident after about a year of dating. I was 24 when our daughter, Ashley, was born. At that time, we weren't married, and honestly, we hadn't even talked seriously about marriage. We were just two young adults, suddenly thrown into the world of diapers, doctor visits, and late-night feedings, all while trying to keep our relationship steady and build our careers. Those first few years with baby Ashley were difficult, but they never felt impossible. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, just a place we could afford. We split the bills, shared chores, and tried our best to co-parent even when we were exhausted from lack of sleep. There were arguments, of course, but we worked through them because Ashley needed stability. When Ashley turned 4, we finally decided to get married. It wasn't some big romantic moment. It simply felt practical. We already lived together, already raised a child together, already shared a life. Marriage just seemed like the official next step, a way to put structure around what we were already doing every day. The wedding itself was small with close family and a few friends. We didn't have much money, so there were no fancy decorations or big venues. After the short ceremony, we had a simple reception at a local restaurant. Then we went right back to our everyday lives. At first, our marriage looked normal from the outside. We cared about each other in the way young people think they understand love. We respected each other, at least at first. We had plans, building a stable home for Ashley, creating a life where we could breathe a little, save money, and feel secure. But slowly, problems we never solved began piling up, like dirt at the bottom of a river. Small arguments we ignored, disagreements about money, parenting, or house chores that we brushed aside because we didn't know how to talk about them properly. Neither of us had the emotional maturity or the communication skills to fix things when they broke. So everything just sat there, growing heavier. Over time, Helen changed. Or the real her simply came out. She became more controlling of almost everything. Any decision involving money had to be made her way. Social plans had to fit her mood. Parenting choices needed her approval. Even small things turned into arguments if I didn't follow her preference. I learned to give in. It felt easier than fighting. I kept quiet when I disagreed. I backed down quickly to avoid long stretches of silence and coldness. The cost of speaking up was always too high. A harmful pattern grew around intimacy. Whenever we argued, even over something tiny, Helen would shut down completely. No hugs, no kisses, no wodoms. She would barely speak to me, moving around the house like I didn't exist. Sometimes this lasted a few days. Other times, it went on for weeks. I started living in a constant state of tension, watching every word, every gesture, afraid of setting her off. Being at home felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong step, and the emotional punishment would return. Work became my escape. Yes, the job demanded long hours, but I also chose to stay late because the office felt easier than my own living room. Dealing with clients was less stressful than dealing with my wife. At work, People actually appreciated me. But Helen saw my long hours differently. She said I was abandoning her and Ashley. That I cared more about work than about them. That I was using my career to run away from our problems. And in some ways, she wasn't completely wrong. I was avoiding home. But I was also pushing myself to provide for our family, to give us the stability we always talked about. Eventually, the only time Helen spoke to me was to point out what I was doing wrong, how I failed as a husband, how I wasn't strict enough or soft enough as a father, how I wasn't earning enough or doing enough. Her criticism chipped away at whatever love was left. We stopped being a married couple. We weren't even friends. We were just two tired, angry people sharing a house, pretending for our daughter's sake. More like strangers living under the same roof. Strangers with a long list of unspoken resentments. By the 15th year of our marriage, Helen and I were barely functioning as a couple anymore. We were not fighting, but we were not living either. We were simply moving through the motions for our daughter Ashley's sake. We slept in the same bed, but emotionally we were so far apart it felt like we were sleeping on different continents. By then, Ashley had already graduated from college. She had a job in marketing and lived in her own apartment. She wasn't a child who needed her parents to stay together for her happiness anymore. She was an adult, building her own life. 2 years later, Helen told me she wanted a divorce. It happened one evening when I came home from work. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Immediately, I entered the house. She told me we needed to talk. Then she said she had been unhappy for a long time, that she was no longer in love with me, and that she wanted a divorce so she could find herself and live a life that felt real instead of one that felt like an obligation. Her voice was cold, as if she had rehearsed every sentence. It felt like this decision had been made months, maybe years ago. And now she was simply delivering the final message. I was shocked, even though I knew our marriage had been falling apart. It's one thing to silently admit to yourself that things are bad. It's another thing entirely to have your spouse look you in the eye and say they're leaving. It felt like the floor opened beneath me, even though my mind knew this day might come. I tried to stay calm. I asked if we could try to fix things instead of rushing into a divorce. I said that after almost 2 decades together, maybe we owed it to ourselves and to Ashley to at least try counseling. But Helen didn't budge. She said she had already made up her mind. According to her, counseling would be pointless because she no longer wanted to save the marriage. She said she needed to move forward with her life rather than stay stuck in something that made her miserable. What I didn't know at the time was that Helen already had someone else providing her with emotional support. Someone who encouraged her decision to leave. Someone who slowly slipped into the empty space between us and positioned himself as the better choice. The divorce process started soon after. We hired lawyers, filed the papers, and began the lengthy, exhausting legal proceedings to end marriage. During this time, Helen's behavior changed completely. She put more effort into her appearance, wearing nicer clothes, and doing her hair and makeup more carefully. She started going out in the evenings without giving explanations. Sometimes she came home late. Sometimes she didn't come home at all. Watching her sudden transformation only strengthened my suspicions. This wasn't how someone acted while grieving the end of a marriage. This was how someone acted when starting a new one. My suspicions were confirmed when mutual friends, and even Ashley, without realizing it, mentioned Mom's new friend. It became clear that Helen had been seeing another man long before she asked for a divorce. Surprisingly, the truth didn't break me. It clarified everything. Helen didn't stop loving me because I failed her. She simply switched to someone else. She found a man who made her feel excited again, and she chose him over working on our marriage. Knowing this actually made the divorce easier emotionally. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped feeling responsible for her unhappiness. She had made her choice, and it had nothing to do with my worth as a husband. At first, we still lived in the same 2-bedroom apartment we had rented for years. But once I knew about the new man, the living situation became unbearable. I couldn't keep sharing a home with Helen while she was openly involved with someone else. So I got my own place on the other side of town, a small 1-bedroom apartment. I moved out before the divorce was finalized. Ashley's reaction to the divorce was painful for me. She had always been closer to her mother, Helen. They had a strong mother-daughter bond that I, as a father, could never match. They would spend hours talking, shopping, and doing activities together. Helen knew how to connect with Ashley in a way I never fully learned. During the divorce, Helen took control of the story that Ashley heard. She painted herself as a lonely, unhappy wife who had suffered for years in a loveless marriage with a difficult husband. She made me sound cold, stubborn, and emotionally unavailable, completely responsible for the marriage falling apart. Ashley believed everything her mother told her. She didn't question any part of it. Slowly, she started treating me differently, becoming distant, more critical, and less interested in spending time with me or hearing my side. She made comments that showed she blamed me for her mother's unhappiness. She hinted that I hadn't been a good husband, that Helen deserved better than what I gave her. That change in Ashley hurt more than the divorce itself. Losing Helen was painful, but not surprising. We had been falling apart for years. But losing my daughter's trust, watching her judge me through Helen's biased words, felt like a profound betrayal. Still, I continued to support Ashley financially. She had gotten engaged about 6 months before Helen asked for the divorce. She and her fiancé didn't have much money, and I had promised to pay for almost the entire wedding, all the major expenses. I made that promise out of love for my daughter, wanting her to have a beautiful wedding day no matter what was happening between her mother and me. Even when the divorce turned nasty, I continued honoring my promise. I kept paying deposits, signing checks, and handling every financial part of the wedding, even while Ashley was taking her mother's side against me. The negotiations with Helen were exhausting. She demanded far more than seemed fair. She wanted a larger share of our assets, continued financial support, and compensation for years of marriage she now claimed were miserable. Every detail became a battle. The process dragged on for months and grew more bitter every week. Meanwhile, wedding plans moved forward. Ashley updated me about decisions, vendors, and payments. I approved everything, trying to be a good father even as my personal life fell apart. The wedding was set for late September, about 10 months after Helen announced the divorce. By then, we had been living apart for 8 months, though the divorce wasn't final yet. We were still legally married, just completely separated. 1 week before the wedding, I received an email from the wedding planner. She sent the final guest list for approval and asked me to confirm everything before they printed place cards and finished the seating chart. I opened the email expecting to quickly approve it. I scrolled through the names, family, friends, relatives from both sides. Everything looked normal until my eyes stopped on a name that hit me like a punch to the stomach. Helen's lover, listed as her +1. I felt shock, anger, humiliation, and deep sadness all at once. I was trying to understand how Ashley could think this was acceptable. How could she believe I should quietly pay for a wedding where I would be forced to watch my ex-wife happily walk around with the man she cheated with? I called Ashley immediately. She answered in a cheerful voice, probably thinking I was calling about some last-minute detail. I tried to stay calm. Ashley, I just saw the guest list. Why is your mom's boyfriend on there? Did she add him without telling you? Do you realize how hurtful it is for me to fund a wedding where I have to watch her with? Before I finished, she cut me off. Her voice turned cold. Dad, Mom deserves to be happy. If bringing her new man makes her happy, then he's coming. This is my wedding. I want Mom to feel comfortable. I'm not removing him. The way she said it made me feel like I was the unreasonable one. Like my pain didn't matter and was less essential than Helen's comfort with her affair partner. Something inside me went quiet. Whatever hope I had that Ashley would understand my feelings or respect me disappeared in that moment. She had chosen her mother's lover over her father's dignity. She decided her mother's happiness mattered more than basic respect for me, the person paying for everything. I ended the call without arguing. I simply acknowledged her decision and hung up. That night, I made my own decision. I contacted every vendor and withdrew my sponsorship from all of them. I canceled contracts whenever possible. I removed my payment information. I requested refunds when allowed and accepted the losses where refunds weren't possible. The money didn't matter anymore. Losing thousands didn't bother me. What mattered was that I would not fund a wedding where I was expected to sit quietly while my ex-wife displayed her affair partner like a prize. I stayed up late, making sure every vendor knew my involvement was over. If Ashley and Helen wanted the wedding to continue, they would have to pay for it themselves. The next morning, everything began to fall apart. She probably got a call from the wedding venue saying the payment I had authorized was no longer valid and that they needed a new payment immediately, or they would have to cancel the booking. She likely got the same message from the photographer, the band, and the florist. Ashley called me within hours. She didn't even let me finish saying hello before she began screaming. She threw accusations at me nonstop, calling me selfish, cruel, petty, and vindictive. She insisted I was ruining her wedding out of spite, that I was punishing her for Mom's mistakes, and that my actions proved exactly what kind of man she believed I was. I listened quietly without raising my voice. I didn't argue, defend myself, or try to calm her down. I simply let her shout until she ran out of energy, and then she hung up. Not long after that, her mother, Helen, called. I didn't answer. I already knew what she was going to say: more blame, more insults, more attempts to paint me as unreasonable and vengeful. She left a long voicemail that I deleted before finishing. She sent several text messages, which I read but didn't reply to. The messages were exactly what I expected. I didn't reply to any because there was nothing left to discuss. I didn't need their opinions, and I didn't owe either of them an explanation. I had made my decision, and I felt completely at peace with it. The wedding was only 3 days away when I pulled the funding. That wasn't enough time for Ashley or Helen to find anyone else willing to cover the massive costs. So, the wedding never happened. All the plans Ashley had been talking about for more than a year simply disappeared. Charlotte is not a big city, and the social crowd that Helen and Ashley belonged to was tightly connected. Word spread fast. People had heard them brag about the wedding for months, about how grand and luxurious it would be. They used the planning to boost their social status. When the wedding collapsed just days before it was supposed to take place, it became a significant topic of gossip. Everyone talked about it. Everyone wondered what had gone wrong. Some people likely blamed me, assuming I was a bitter father trying to destroy his daughter's big day. They probably believed the dramatic version of the story Helen and Ashley told. But others knew the truth. They understood that I simply refused to pay for my own humiliation. To them, my decision wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. A necessary one. Through all of it, I kept silent. I didn't share my side of the story with anyone except my attorney and a few close, trusted friends. I stayed focused on what mattered most: finishing the divorce, closing that chapter completely, and moving on with my life. The divorce took another 3 months to finalize after the wedding was called off. By December, every document had been reviewed and processed. The judge signed the final decree, and just like that, our marriage was officially over. Surprisingly, the terms of the divorce were not as hostile as they could have been. Helen's lawyer advised her to stay reasonable, reminding her that I could have made the entire process much uglier by exposing the full timeline of her affair and her behavior throughout the separation. In the end, we reached a settlement that divided our assets fairly. There was no long-term spousal support, only a short, transitional period to help her adjust. When I walked out of the courthouse that cold December afternoon, I was officially free from Helen. After the canceled wedding, both Ashley and Helen cut me off completely. They stopped talking to me, made no attempts to reach out, offered no apologies, and had no conversations about fixing anything. At first, that silence hurt more than I expected. Losing the relationship with my daughter felt like mourning someone who was still alive. I'd think about her every day, wondering if time would soften her anger, wondering if someday she might understand why I did what I did. But slowly, the silence changed. It stopped hurting. It became peaceful. I realized I didn't need a relationship with someone who could disrespect me so easily. Someone who would stand by her mother's affair partner instead of her own father. Someone who expected me to pay for a wedding, without caring how that would make me feel. In that quiet, I learned something important. Sometimes losing people is the only way to find yourself again. Helen's silence was even more welcome. After years of walking on eggshells and enduring her control and criticism, not having her in my life felt like liberation. Like I could finally breathe fully and make decisions based on what I wanted rather than what would avoid triggering her anger. Looking back now, there are some lessons to be learned from this entire situation. I learned that paying for something does not mean you have to accept disrespect. Many people think that once you commit money to a project or event, you must follow through no matter how badly you're treated. But that's not true. You can walk away when the situation changes in a way you never agreed to. If something you offered to support turns into something meant to embarrass or hurt you, you have every right to withdraw your support. I also learned that sometimes children stand with the wrong parent for complicated emotional reasons. Ashley, siding with her mother, Helen, wasn't really about me being a bad father. It was about Helen controlling the story, Ashley feeling closer to her mother, and Ashley trying to justify Helen's decisions. Understanding all that psychology helps me make sense of what happened. But it doesn't mean I have to accept being treated with disrespect. I learned that protecting your dignity comes with a price, but it's a price worth paying. Pulling my financial support from Ashley's wedding cost me my relationship with my own daughter. It also brought judgment from people who didn't know the whole story. But the alternative, funding an event where I would be publicly humiliated, would have cost me something far more substantial, my self-respect. And self-respect is worth more than any relationship with people who don't value you. I learned that toxic relationships shape how children see the world. Years of watching Helen control, belittle, and criticize me taught Ashley that treating me poorly was normal. She learned from her mother that my feelings didn't matter, and that Helen's wants were always more important. A toxic marriage teaches children unhealthy ideas about love, respect, and loyalty. The most important lesson I learned is that some relationships simply cannot be saved, nor should they be. People told me I should have paid for the wedding anyway, for Ashley's sake, that I should keep a relationship with her no matter how she treated me. But genuine relationships require mutual respect. Without that, you're not maintaining a bond. You're just fulfilling an obligation. And obligations are not love. Some people think I was cruel to withdraw the funding so close to the wedding. They say I should have sat down with Ashley and explained my boundaries calmly instead of canceling everything immediately. They believe I ruined her wedding to get back at Helen, not because I had a real reason. But these people don't understand what it feels like to see your wife's affair partner listed as an honored guest at an event you're paying for. They don't understand what it's like to realize your own daughter values her mother's happiness with the man who destroyed your marriage more than she values your dignity as her father. I didn't cancel to cause pain. I canceled because that was the moment I discovered the truth. If I had known earlier, I would have withdrawn earlier. I found out only days before the wedding, so I had to act with only days left. Some people blame me. Others think I did the right thing. I haven't spoken to Ashley or Helen since then. I don't know how they are. I don't know if Ashley ended up marrying her fiancé in a smaller ceremony. I don't know if Helen is still with her affair partner or if that relationship collapsed once the excitement faded. I don't know if either of them ever thinks about me or what life could have looked like if things had gone differently. Sometimes I feel sad about losing Ashley. She was my daughter for so many years. I watched her grow from a baby into a young woman. I was proud of the person she used to be before the divorce changed everything. But most of the time, I feel at peace. I don't need people in my life who treat me that way, even if they are family. Losing them hurts, but keeping them would have hurt even more. Self-respect requires boundaries. And sometimes those boundaries mean letting go of relationships that can no longer continue. And for that, I am proud. Proud that I stood firm, proud that I refused to pay for my own humiliation, and proud that I chose my self-respect over relationships that demanded I surrender it.